Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we wrapped up the first part of the Dawn of the Aspects ebook. Ended up with kind of like a Neolithic battle between the ancient aspects, or at least 4 out of 5 of them, and Galakron. I think it would be kind of neat, since this is a 5-part series, if each one sort of somehow focused on one of the aspects. Sorry, one of the aspects more than like different each time. Like the first one was blue, it was Calicos and Malagos, but I don't think that's going to happen. But that would be kind of neat. Let's find out. So stay a while and listen to part 2. We're going to read the first chapter of it. Chapter 1 of this is called The Nexus Touched already. It's a bad omen for my little guess, considering that's the base of the blue dragonflight. The hot, malodorous breath nearly overwhelmed Calic and his host as the jaws close. Calic wondered if perhaps it would be best for Malagos to let the stench knock them out, so that they would not feel the monstrous teeth crush through their shared flesh and bone. A violent, steaming burst of wind suddenly threw Malagos back. The burst was accompanied by an odd, muffled thunder. At the same time, Galakron's maw opened wide again, enabling Malagos to tumble to freedom. Finally out of range, the blue and white proto-dragon frantically righted himself. As he did, both he and Calic saw the source of Malagos' salvation. With a defiant laugh, Neltharion darted away from under Galakron's throat. Galakron hacked, creating another powerful explosion of wind that forced back not only Malagos, but also other proto-dragons in its path. Neltharion had struck at the weakest point, just at the right moment, an attack that Calic would have thought foolhardy at the best of times. Even while regaining his breath, Galakron had the cunning and fury to snatch at his tiny attacker as the charcoal-gray proto-dragon dived. Claws as large as Neltharion closed on him, but at the last second, a fearsome blast of what appeared to Calic to be sand half-blinded Galakron. A dust-brown male veered off. Galakron shook his head to clear his vision, enabling his prey to make good their escape. Neltharion flew directly toward Malagos. Fly or die! It was good advice to both Calic and Malagos, but as Malagos turned, Galakron's roar arose from behind them. The roar was accompanied by a swooshing sound and punctuated by a heavy thud and Neltharion's pained grunt. Peering over his shoulder, Malagos saw that where the titanic monster's claws had missed, Galakron's long, thick tail had not. Several times the length of Galakron's hind limb had easily caught Neltharion on the side, striking him hard. Stunned, the gray male spiraled toward the harsh ground below. Perhaps Galakron intended to pursue, but a panicked yellow female chose that moment to pass near enough in the gigantic proto-dragon's field of vision to attract his attention. With an eager roar, the hungry behemoth gave chase. Unheedful of this stroke of luck, Malagos had already dived after Neltharion. The other male had endangered himself to save Malagos, and Calic saw without surprise that his host could do no less. The blue and white proto-dragon stretched hard to reach the plummeting figure, but even as swift as he was, it was clear to Malagos and Calic that there would be no catching Neltharion before the gray struck the ground. The fire-orange form rose from below, colliding with the stunned male. Alexstrasza grunted hard as she and the bulkier Neltharion hit, but somehow the female managed to maintain control. For a few vital seconds, she stopped Neltharion's fatal descent just long enough for Malagos to reach the pair. Without a word, he gripped Neltharion by the shoulders, hefting the larger male up and relieving Alexstrasza of her burden. She in turn rose and assisted him with carrying Neltharion away from the vicinity. Through Malagos, Calic observed the area and found it astonishingly devoid of blood and torn flesh. He realized that Galakron had swallowed nearly all of its victims whole. In some ways, the blue found that even more horrific, imagining how those proto-dragons had felt as they vanished in the behemoth's gullet. So many, Alexstrasza gasped as they flew. So many. Malagos said nothing, but his thoughts mirrored her words. Calic's host was just as shocked by the events as she was. A new sound rumbled through the area, a sound so odd, so unnerving that the two proto-dragons nearly lost their grip on Neltharion. The sound grew more intense, more guttural, and because of that, more terrifying. Kalik still had no idea what it could be, but Malygos at last identified it with something from his own experience. Images flashed through Kalik's mind, images of his host regurgitating bits of bone or other indelible parts of various prey. Somewhere Kalik understood with growing sickness, Galakrond was doing something akin to that. Only what he was disgorging was not the remnants of any buffalo or fish. Kalik's world suddenly swam again. His consciousness was torn from Malygos. Visions of Galakrond feasting ran through Kalik's thoughts, and then the accursed darkness overtook the blue. Yet once more a familiar voice called to him from that darkness. Kalak, Kalak. Why Jaina called him this time the dragon did not know, but with what sense he still had, Kalik blocked his thoughts from her notice. Even as he did that, he felt the world around him return. A harsh wind struck his face. Kalik instinctively shifted position and discovered himself slipping. At last able to open his eyes, the blue watched a rocky ridge slide up over him. Kalik realized that he was falling. With one paw, he dug his claws into the dirt and stone, managing to slow his descent, but not to stop it. Kalik tried to use his other paw, but it remained tightly shut despite his desperate need. He toppled backward, finding out then that it was not a ridge from which he had slipped, but a mountain. Kalik sought to right himself, only to have one wing clip the mountainside and send him tumbling faster. Below, the blue jagged rocks that reminded him too much of Galakrond's teeth shot toward him. Managing to focus, Kalik cast a spell. His wild descent slowed nearly to a halt. It was a very short-term solution, but he hoped that he would not need more than a few moments. Catching his breath, the blue dragon rolled onto his stomach, already feeling the hastily cast spell dissipating. Kalik flapped hard. As he regained flight, his spell faded away. The blue dragon alighted on another mountain. There was no continued call from Jaina. He hoped that she had given up. Either way, Kalik had only one interest now, and that was the foul thing still gripped in his paw. The now complete artifact seemed to taunt him with its persistent glow. There was naturally no point in throwing it away. It would somehow return to plague him. He also doubted the wisdom of attempting to destroy it again. Kalik let the wind clear his head as he struggled to decide what to do next. If not for Jaina's voice, the blue would not even have been certain that he was in his own time and in his own body. It was becoming harder to separate reality from vision. After several fruitless minutes of ruminating, Kalik launched himself toward the Nexus. Each moment of flight was nerve-wracking, the blue expecting to be pulled back into the visions at the worst possible opportunity. When he had to fly over water, Kalik paid special attention to his protective spells. But to his relief and astonishment, the artifact permitted him to reach the Nexus unhindered. Kalik decided to try to focus on something other than the object of his nightmares. The Nexus's collection had to be organized, even if he had initially made the suggestion as an excuse, not because he'd had any true desire to take on the task, but he realized that before he could begin on the collection, he had to work on strengthening the wards. There was no chance that they would remain strong enough to protect the Nexus and its contents for very much longer, unless he attended to them now. He changed to his humanoid form, at the moment feeling oddly more comfortable in it than in his true one. Kalik summoned a simple marble stand with a fluted column and cautiously set the artifact atop the waist-high platform, then turned his attention to the wards. Shutting his eyes, he concentrated. Even with his eyes closed, the blue dragon could see the world around him, but it was a world crisscrossed with a variety of multicolored ley lines. All of Azeroth was draped in this complex arrangement of lines of magical energy, and those he currently viewed served a specific purpose. They powered the various wards that acted as the Nexus's protection. Following along the ley lines, he began to inspect each ward carefully. Kalik quickly saw the weakest of the wards. He put forth a hand, which in his world view glowed with lavender energy, and gestured at the ley line needed. With his other hand, he drew from another of Azeroth's ley lines and linked the two where the core of the first lay exposed. But before he could do more, the Nexus itself began to shimmer. Dismissing his spell work, Kalik opened his eyes and immediately looked to the artifact. Not at all to his surprise, it had taken on a different glow, this one matching the array of magical colors associated with the immense forces in and around the Nexus. The stronger the relic's glow, the less intense was that of Kalik's surroundings. That the artifact could have any effect on the Nexus stunned Kalik. It had done little when he had last brought it here, but then the artifact had not been whole before. The missing piece had not only magnified the artifact's existing abilities, but also possibly even stirred up others formerly dormant. I wonder if that's the focusing nurse? I don't know. Calic grabbed the artifact and transformed. Planting it against his chest, the former aspect fled through the Nexus as quickly as he could. The energies of the Nexus continued to fluctuate as he raced through tunnel after tunnel until at last he reached the exit. Once outside, Calic soared high into the sky. Below him, he could make out the entirety of the Nexus. The dragon sensed the various energies in play in a manner with which he was entirely unfamiliar. Calic, who should have understood better than most the nature of such magical manipulation, could not fathom with what intent it was done. The rich colors normally reserved for the Nexus's forces now radiated strongly from the artifact. As for the Nexus, it abruptly flared bright again, so much so that the blue dragon was forced to look away or be blinded. And then the intense stirring of magical energy subsided. What Calic expected to see when he glanced back at the Nexus, he could not say. What he did see both perplexed and surprised him. The Nexus looked and felt to him exactly as it had before. With a wary hiss, the dragon circled his sanctum once, seeking any change, however subtle. Despite his best efforts, Calic still found no difference. "All that could hardly be for nothing," he muttered to the infuriating object in his grip. "What did you do?" The relic, its glow once more normal, gave no clue. Snorting, the dragon dived back down to the gap through which he had emerged. As he entered, his gaze immediately went to the artifact. However, there was no change in the glow. Calic returned to his chambers, expecting each moment that the foul thing would begin anew to wreak havoc. That there was no visible sign of it doing so did not assuage his fears in the least. While Calic was aware that he might only be feeling paranoid, there was still the chance that the artifact might be up to something, even while apparently quiescent. Determined more than ever to find some other relic that might help him combat the effects of the one he held, Calic summoned forth an ancient piece in which he had particular hope. An oval crystal of a deep aquamarine hue and the size of his paw materialized in the air before him. Calic was not certain of all its properties, but some of the knowledge that had been passed on to him gave him the impression that it might nullify the magic of the octagonal relic. But the moment he touched the crystal, its rich hue faded. Calic quickly probed the artifact. It was utterly devoid of any trace of magical energy. A curse that mixed well the best or worst of dragon, human, and dwarf escaped the blue's mouth. Enraged at this latest so swift defeat, Calic threw the octagonal antiquity without care about what might happen. It flew with tremendous speed toward the wall, then came to a halt barely an inch from possible destruction. From there it descended to the floor without even a sound. The dragon roared. Unable to stop himself, Calic unleashed a barrage of spells upon the relic. Fire sought to consume the piece. Bolts of arcane energy assailed it. A lance of ice attempted to pierce its surface. Lightning blasted it. And none of the attacks left the slightest scar upon it. His breathing ragged from the strain of his efforts, Calic slumped. The artifact continued to glow faintly again, seeming to mock him. The blue dragon brooded for a while, then suddenly stiffened. Perhaps I've been going about this the wrong way. Calic had never really tried to understand the artifact. From the start, he had seen it only as something evil. Yet now he wondered what purpose there could possibly be in driving him mad. Approaching the artifact, the dragon studied every bit of the exterior that he could see without touching it, but he noticed no change. Another probe with his powers also yielded nothing new. Still, Calic was not satisfied. The artifact could even at this moment be in the midst of some pre-planned spell work that his acute senses could not detect. It had already proved itself capable of acting upon him without noticing. He focused on the small addition he had found during his second excursion to the skeleton. Simple as it appeared, it was obviously an integral part of the overall relic. Thus far, it seemed to him that it had magnified the original effect, but he believed it also did more. A slight gleam in the center of the smaller piece caught his attention. The dragon squinted. A young human woman with long, blonde hair stood before him. A woman he knew too well. There was an innocence about her, an innocence that drew him, as much as her beauty. "Envina," the blue dragon gasped. He reached a paw to her, only to have it go through her own extended hand. Suddenly, Calic stood in a forest. He was no longer a dragon, but rather a half-elven figure. It was the same form in which Calic had first met Envina. "Calic," Envina faintly called, her outline becoming more faded and distant. She continued to extend her hand toward him as if beckoning him to join her, was jolted. The second calling of his name had not been done by Anvina, but by Jaina. It was enough to bring him back to consciousness. Kalik wrenched himself away from the artifact. He was covered in sweat. He also noticed that, as in the dream, he had hands, not paws. At some point, Kalik had changed shape without even noticing it. At that moment, Kalik felt the presence of another blue dragon. Somehow the knowledge that he was no longer alone in the Nexus enabled him to pull himself together. Whirling away from the artifact, Kalik left the chamber to see who had returned and why. It was not until he was nearly at one of the entrances that he saw movement. Kalik marched toward the newcomer without saying a word. The smaller blue dragon, a female, had her back toward him. Kalik hesitated. Tyree? The female turned, but she was not the one he had thought her to be. The former aspect silently berated himself for expecting to see the female blue to whom he had once been promised. The blue before him stared at Kalik as if seeing an orc. He recalled this transformation. Although they were creatures of magic, blues generally retain their dragon forms when in the Nexus. Spellweaver, she finally acknowledged. I thought you were away. This time, ignoring the use of a title no longer his, Kalik resumed his draconic shape. Now peering down on her, Kalik could not help blurting, "And you hope to be about your business and depart before I returned." She looked as aghast as a dragon could. No, Spellweaver. In truth, I am pleased you are here. I wanted to tell you of an anomaly I sensed near the Dragonblight recently, very near Wormrest Temple. Kalik knew immediately that she was referring to the artifact stirring. I know of it. There's nothing to concern yourself about. The female looked slightly embarrassed. I should have known that you would be aware of it. That should have been the end of it, but the other blue dragon simply remained where she was, looking vastly uncomfortable. Kalik made an assumption about what ran through her mind. I am grateful for your concern. You were on your way somewhere else, though, weren't you? Yes, I thought I would explore. He let her get no further. Then by all means you should continue on. Again, you have my thanks for coming back to give warning. She gave him another uncomfortable look, then, bowing her head, departed. Kalik paused in thought for a moment and turned from the entrance, just in time to catch a glimpse of a shadowed figure the size of a night elf or tall human in the darkened passage from which he had only just come. The dragon surged forward, moving with more than enough swiftness to catch up with any intruder. However, even though he reached an area where the long passage would have prevented anyone from hiding or escaping into a side tunnel, there was no one. Kalik probed the area with magic, but there was definitely no trace of another. Only as that knowledge sank in did the blue also see better in his mind just what that intruder had looked like beyond his mere height. The image that formed made Kalik certain that his sanity was indeed crumbling, and crumbling fast. It was the same cloaked and hooded figure from the visions. So it's got to be a time traveler, maybe? And some kind of eternal traveler? I don't know. Alright, so, we'll wait. I'll reserve judgment until we get further into this part. Okay, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and yeah, hopefully you guys are enjoying it. I look forward to seeing everybody next time on Lore of Warcraft.